or drive over one. But there are other issues with it. It's no good surviving an IED if you then break down and you're under fire. And the military have to have confidence in the equipment they're supplied with on the front line. And unfortunately, as I can see it, there's no confidence in this vehicle. But there is also a bigger picture, because in February, Michael Fallon, the Defence Secretary, brought out a white paper saying that he wants to take the decisions about combat immunity away from the courts, and he wants legislation brought in that the MOD will suffer no liability and will have no duty of care to those men and women on the front line if they are sent with the wrong or defective equipment. That's very worrying.
OK, we're going to have to leave it there. Richard, Hilary, thank you very much indeed.
Thank you.
Now, ayahuasca is a potent hallucinogenic tea that's been popular in the Amazon for years, but is becoming increasingly available at retreats across Europe. It can be extremely dangerous, sometimes known as the vine of death. It can cause vomiting and hours of hallucinations. But one doctor in the UK says it should be considered as a treatment for a wide range of mental health issues. Simon Mundy has been finding out more about this controversial drug.
These people have taken ayahuasca, one of the strongest psychedelic drugs in the world. Many backpackers have taken it in South America over the last few decades, but there are significantly more ayahuasca ceremonies being run in Europe now too. Although it is illegal here and can be dangerous, one doctor thinks it should be researched as a possible treatment for things like depression and PTSD.
As a medical doctor and a research scientist, what I'm asking for is that we do this research, we carry out these studies, and we demonstrate whether these drugs, ayahuasca, can be used as a treatment to reduce distress and pain for mental health patients. If we can show that ayahuasca works and can be used safely, it's absolutely ethical that we develop this as a medicine.
Ayahuasca is a potent hallucinogenic brew that's been used by shamans or healers in the Amazon for centuries for medical and spiritual purposes. Drinking ayahuasca can make you physically sick, but that's not the only thing you need to be wary of. It can be a psychologically traumatic experience. In 2014, Dave travelled abroad to an ayahuasca ceremony with a friend of his called Sam, who killed himself a few months later.
He had his life together, he had a girlfriend, he'd moved in with her, they just got a dog together. On the surface, he was someone that you were proud to hang around with. It was a small ceremonial hall, and you have little mattresses, so you all sleep in there together, and he was actually laid right next to me on a mattress on the floor. And the thing was, he spent the whole time there laughing.
So how was Sam when you came back from the ceremony? Was there any indication at all that there was anything wrong?
Absolutely not. Like, on the surface, man, he was cool, had his act together, completely, like, all he did was talk about what a great time he had. Like, he was, like, he posted on Facebook and stuff about how, you know, it was this incredible life-changing transformation he'd had. He showed no signs for like 2 months after the ceremony. There was no signs that anything was wrong. It had opened Pandora's box to an extent. It had brought to the surface things that he's been carrying his whole life, and he didn't have the support to deal with this or to integrate this emotion into his life. And I think that's why he decided to kill himself.
So you are sure in your mind that the ayahuasca contributed to it?
I think that had he not taken it, would Sam still be here? Probably yes. Probably yes.
You can see the longer version of Simon's report on our programme page. Let's talk now to Harry Shapiro, Director of Online Drug Information Service DrugWise, who says that although ayahuasca might have benefits in a clinical setting, it's a strong drug and people should not be experimenting with it naively. Dr. Christos Dimitriou is also here in the studio with us. He's a consultant psychiatrist who's specialised in treating patients with depression and PTSD for the past 24 years. And with us on Skype from San Francisco is Dr. Bia Labate, an anthropologist who has focused her studies on ayahuasca and spent time in the Amazon experiencing ayahuasca ceremonies as well. Welcome to the programme. Harry, I want to start with you. Why do you have concerns about this substance?
Well, as we heard in the report just now, it is a very powerful hallucinogenic drug, and the ayahuasca brew has other compounds in it as well. It's not just the DMT. And I think, I mean, I have been to a meeting in London with shamans a few years ago, and they explained the kind of very detailed ceremonies that people go through, particularly young boys going into manhood, is a kind of rite of initiation ceremony. Mm-hmm. Take them into the jungle, they prepare them for weeks, special diets and all the rest of it. And they have their own sort of spiritual and tribal support if things don't necessarily go the way they should. And I'm not at all convinced that probably desperate people who may well have found other treatments not working for them, to go online and just go to these retreats in a fairly kind of sort of naive kind of way, without fully realising what the psychological impact of this can be. So I think there's a Latin phrase called caveat emptor, which means buyer beware, and I think and it could be the people who are most vulnerable are the ones who could be most needy and most tempted to try something which, as we heard in that report, they might not be able to control in the end.
Would you rule out testing? What about potential benefits that we've heard talked about if testing happened in a clinical environment?
Oh, absolutely. And in fact, with this drug and with ketamine, with ecstasy, there are clinical trials going on around the world to try and, because a number of these drugs were used, LSD as well, was used in psychotherapy before they got banned because they were being used recreationally. So I think a lot of these drugs have got tremendous potential, but under the kind of rubric, if you like, of proper clinical therapeutic trials, and not some of the kind of random stuff which I suspect is kind of going on with this.
Christos, you've treated people with depression, PTSD for the past 24 years. Is it worth experimenting with exploring drugs like ayahuasca because of the potential benefits and help for treating conditions like those?
I would be very careful about using the term exploring and experimenting. I'm in total agreement with Harry that it needs to be investigated under a rigorous scientific process.
In a clinical environment?
In a clinical environment, like any compound, any chemical compound that we are considering at some point for it to become treatment. I do not believe it is a treatment for the here and now.
Potentially, though, just looking at cannabis, and so many people talk about the health benefits and the personal benefits that they've experienced taking drugs like cannabis.
Well, I think a better example other than cannabis is, since we are talking about, particularly with PTSD, is the research on MDMA, which is much further progressed in the use of PTSD, and only recently, I think towards the end of 2016, it got the green light for phase 3 trials. Now, MDMA is much further along the road to one day perhaps becoming a licensed treatment. It's not yet, but I would expect ayahuasca to follow exactly the same pathway if it's going to be a credible treatment one day.
OK, let's bring in Bia at this point, because you have dedicated your whole academic career as an anthropologist to the study of ayahuasca. You've written 17 books about it. What's the appeal?
Well, thanks a lot for having me. I say hello from everybody from San Francisco, 2 a.m. That's how much I enjoy this topic. I'm up to have this conversation. I'm happy to be here, as apparently I am the only one with real empirical experience and focused on the topic itself. I just want to remark that ayahuasca was presented as a vine of the dead. That's the wrong way to designate it. The vine of the death. It's not, when native people say it's the vine of the death, it doesn't mean that causes you to die. What they're saying, it's the vine of the dead, meaning by that the vine of the souls, or that it's a means of communication with the spiritual world. It's kind of a bridge, a kind of dialogue with the invisible world, with the ancestors, with the spiritual world. So ayahuasca is a central sacrament or medicine, or there's other ways to call it, for hundreds of indigenous tribes in the Amazon forest, and has been used for, we don't know how much time, but probably, immemorial time. And it has played a central role in the societies in all aspects of life, both in, as somebody mentioned, initiation, but also in socialization and transmitting of histories and transmitting of identity and socializing. It's related to arts. It's related to the very idea of being human. So a lot is said about ayahuasca, but very little is known. It's kind of a large topic, but I'm happy to share more about it.
Okay, well, let me then ask you how you would respond to our guests' serious concerns about this, about ayahuasca, about this being used in a drug tourism environment, and about this being used outside of a clinical setting.
Well, I think it's legitimate to be concerned with something that you don't know of. And, when you don't know things, it's normal attitude of the human mind to be prejudiced or to be fearful. But it's a little bit funny to claim that ayahuasca could only be used in a clinical setting when this is a central part and identity of so many indigenous groups and mestizo groups and religious communities outside of mainstream big cities like, San Francisco or London or New York and etc. I mean, this has been used. I also, don't know where the program gets this designation as extremely dangerous, because there has been at least 20 years of research, solid, sound research, showing that ayahuasca is actually pretty safe under controlled circumstances. So there's
whose research is that?
There's lots of research. The pioneer research started in the beginning of the 90s in Brazil, observing long-time users of the UDV religion in Brazil. There is a branch of the UDV religion in the UK. They were just trying to get legal and are having a hard time exactly because of lack of knowledge and lack of understanding. So those were some of the initial research, but there's all kinds of research that has been researched with Native American people in the Northern Hemisphere, and there's also a big, large clinical trial with over 80 subjects that happened over the last 3 years in Brazil, and the first results have been published. But this is just not about the research. This is also about religion and beliefs and cultural practices that have deep roots in the Amazon forest. And naturally, as culture transforms, as globalization comes along and the means of communication are increased, these practices tend to expand abroad. So it's a very reductionistic approach to try to outlaw them or to banish them or to stigmatize them. What we have to do is to understand them and to create favorable conditions for this expansion to happen smoothly.
Okay, Bia, I just want to get our other guests to respond to that. Can you respond to what Bia is saying?
Yes, indeed. I think it's important to put across the medical perspective. I mean, when we look in medicine at treatments, we're not expecting a treatment to be without any risk whatsoever. We accept risk as part of treatment. What we're saying about ayahuasca and any compound that has not gone through a rigorous research process is that we do not fully understand those risks. what happens with other treatments by the time they become licensed is that they become more predictable from the point of view of us understanding safety and efficacy of those treatments, so that patients can make informed decisions and weigh their options. I do not believe we are at that point with ayahuasca.
I think the point your guest made is it makes the actual point that these substances have been part of traditional cultural, religious practices, particularly in South America and elsewhere, going back many, centuries probably, where the whole thing has become acculturized and in a sense used safely, and people kind of know what they're doing. But she also makes the point about globalization and how these practices will begin to spread. And I think it's that transition point that is the point of where people need to be aware of what they're doing of. So I think, the culture of an Amazonian tribe in Brazil is one thing. Trying to extend these practices safely, in a large mansion in southern England somewhere, or in a tent, or however it's done,
people might find it hard to understand because the drug is the same, the substance is the same. So how important is the environment?
I would argue against that.
No,
go on, one at a time.
No, the point is that people seem to think that a drug effect is simply the relationship between the drug and the brain, and it's not. It's more complicated than that. You have what they call the setting. So the impact of a drug will depend also, particularly hallucinogenic drugs like these, on the environment in which the drug is taken, whether you feel safe, whether you feel protected and supported. And the other issue is what they call set, which is what your expectation is of what's going to happen. And if you go into that without much knowledge and fearful of what's likely to happen, the effects of that drug may likely be more dramatic and more negative. So the important thing here is not just drug and brain. There's much more to the drug experience than simply the reaction between chemicals.
Quick point, and I'll bring Bia back in.
Very quick point, because you said the drug is the same, and I don't believe that's true.
Just on the level, if someone's watching, they don't know, they're thinking, hang on a minute, what's the difference between taking it in the Amazon or taking it here, if you're talking about the same substance?
It's not just about the substance. Ayahuasca is a compound of two psychoactive substances, DMT, which is a psychedelic, a hallucinogen substance, and an MAOI, a monoamine oxidase inhibitor, which is another psychoactive substance. When you are having ayahuasca in the setting that we're describing, you don't exactly know how much of each you're going to be getting. And you also do not know what lies within the individual in terms of pre-existing conditions, mental health issues, physical health issues, anything else that they may have taken or not taken. So it is a much more unpredictable setting. The phase 1 trials, which are the first line for any compound to go on the licensing route, is basically about using set amounts of set compound and establishing safety parameters. I'm not aware of that having been the case with ayahuasca.
A lot more discussion needs to happen about this, clearly. Thank you both very much indeed for coming onto the programme. Still to come, tomorrow marks 50 years of BBC Radio 1. So what does its future hold? And a report says that patients are dying alone in hospitals as a shortage of nurses puts more and more pressure on those at the front line of healthcare. Time now to get a summary of the day's news with Anita.
Our latest headlines on BBC News. Theresa May has stressed that Britain is unconditionally committed to the defence of Europe. The Prime Minister says that the UK's role in Europe's security has never been more vital. She's attending a summit in Estonia, where she'll also meet the German Chancellor Angela Merkel, and is expected to press for her support in moving the Brexit negotiations into their next phase. Interest rates will rise in the relatively near term, the Governor of the Bank of England has told the BBC. In the clearest indication yet that there could be a rate rise as early as November, Mark Carney suggested that it was time for the bank to ease its foot off the accelerator. The next opportunity for a change in interest rates is the bank's Monetary Policy Committee meeting on the 2nd of November. More than 20 people have died and many others are injured after a stampede at a railway station in the Indian city of Mumbai. The stampede took place just after rush hour on a narrow pedestrian bridge leading to Elphinstone Road train station in the centre of the city. The authorities are investigating what caused the stampede, but eyewitnesses say heavy rainfall led to overcrowding on the bridge. Armoured vehicles designed to protect British troops from roadside bombs keep breaking down. The Foxhound, which cost nearly £1 million each, replaced the controversial Snatch Land Rovers on deployments in Iraq and Afghanistan. The V-shaped hull is designed to give better protection from roadside bombs. However, the BBC has been told there are serious concerns about the reliability of the vehicles when in hot conditions. A British climber has been killed after a huge rockfall in California's Yosemite National Park. A massive sheet of granite fell from a vertical rock formation, crushing the man and seriously injuring his female companion. The Foreign Office says it's providing support and assistance for the families of the people involved. That's a summary of the latest BBC News.
Anita, thank you very much. Here's some sport now with Holly.
Morning, Tina. Well, our top story this morning, Manchester City have confirmed that their striker Sergio Aguero has been involved in a road accident in Holland. In a statement, the club said he was on a day off and had suffered injuries in the incident. He will return to Manchester this morning and will be checked by the club doctors. Now, Aguero has scored 7 goals in 8 matches already this season, and he's on the brink of becoming the club's record goal scorer. Now, Arsenal made the most of some questionable goalkeeping to make it 2 wins out of 2 in the Europa League last night. They beat Barte Borisov 4-2 in Belarus, Everton only managing a 2-2 draw at home to Apollon Limassol. And Luke Gale was the hero for Castleford as they booked their place in Rugby League's grand final, beating St Helens 23-22. Now, Gale only had his appendix removed 2 weeks ago. He scored 15 of their 23 points and kicked the winner in extra time. And frustration in Malaysia for championship leader Lewis Hamilton. He struggled in second practice, finishing 6th. Sebastian Vettel was quickest. We'll, of course, have more on all those stories coming up, Tina, in around half an hour's time.
Holly, thank you. Now, 50 years ago tomorrow at 7 in the morning, DJ Tony Blackburn launched a brand new radio station on the BBC. Over the decades since, Radio 1 has played a huge role in music, entertainment and popular culture, from creating household names, launching the careers of countless artists and building on its brand, including the Live Lounge, the official chart and its sister station, 1Extra. It's been the soundtrack to many people's lives in the UK for the last 50 years. But as young people increasingly choose streaming services like Spotify over radio, what will its future look like?
10 seconds to go before Radio 1, Tony Blackburn.